Welcome to the Atheist in Recovery podcast, where we talk about finding hope in recovery. And now your host, Dr. Adina Silvestri.
Bonjour, Atheists in Recovery, and welcome to episode 103 of the Atheists in Recovery podcast, where it is my job to interview guests and address the spiritual and scientific belief systems of those in long-term recovery in order to deconstruct limiting thought patterns and introduce new behaviors and routines you can use. But today, my friends, is a solo episode, no interviewing required. Today, we are going to talk about the opposite of addiction, which is connection. I heard that recently by Dr. Gabor Mate, and I really liked it. I'm sure he didn't coin the phrase, but I liked it nonetheless. And so we will be talking about the correlation between brain spotting, attachment, and addiction behavior. Before we start, though, I want to share a quote. And I think this quote really sums up this podcast well. And I use it in my men's group today. I have a private practice in Richmond, Virginia. And so I have an online men's group. And the quote today in that group was, "Write often and edit well." And so today we're going to be looking at the stories that we tell ourselves, the narratives that we tell ourselves, and how we can edit them in a very healthy, non-judgmental way, of course. So let's get started. This episode is jam-packed with tools, and so let's just jump right in. Brain spotting, the definition that I use pretty often is it goes beyond the mind to get direct access to the brain. So just as the eyes naturally scan the outside environment for information, they could also be used to scan our internal environment. So brain spotting uses the visual fields to turn the scanner back on itself and guide the brain to find lost information and ultimately resolution. So that's the definition, one of them anyway, of brain spotting. Let's look at a case study, and then we'll talk about 3 ways brain spotting can help heal addiction. Let's look at Tina. Tina is a 49-year-old female who is 3 months sober. She denies any trauma. Her relationships are mostly of an insecure attachment flavor, and I know that there are many forms of insecure attachment, and we'll talk about hers in a minute, but she's fearful the relationships that she engages in won't work, and when her fears come true or she finds evidence to support her theories are in quotation marks, then she gets aggressive, violent maybe, or she may just leave the relationship altogether. Then her and I meet. She decides to get help to stop drinking after her latest failed relationship in which she's tried to do everything to please him. Her words. He was her drinking partner, and being in a house where drinking was how you would connect, well, made it pretty impossible to want to stop. So her and I start with a setup called Brainspotting Resource Spot, and we focus on her latest breakup and the feelings that are coming up for her right now. It's still very fresh. In one of her first sessions, I'm surprised to learn that Tina suffered from extreme criticism from her father, an accomplished psychiatrist, in which she felt her worth was measured by her performance and how she looked. So many comments about how many A's she's received, how much she ate, how she looked. And so that's important to note because that will provide a pathway into some of the stories that she's currently telling herself. Okay, let's jump into the 3 ways. Number 1, brain spotting helps with early messages. So the first common theme brain spotting explores really talks about the trauma. There are very few direct skills that are learned from brain spotting alone, but the focus is primarily revealing hard to access feelings and thoughts. So that's what we're getting at. We're getting at those subcortical thoughts. And it's extremely effective at accessing parts of the brain that are traumatized by many unintended experiences. And what I mean by that is I would say 90% of the people that I talk to say they're not traumatized. And I heard this quote fairly recently that said there are only two people in this world. And the first are people that are traumatized, and the second are people that are traumatized but just don't know it. So I loved it, and I feel like that would explain Tina, because she really doesn't identify with trauma. And it's clearly a part of her early stories, her early messages. So Brainspotting will reveal these things. And many unintended experiences, meaning, your parents don't mean to traumatize you. And we'll look at how they do that in point number 3. But it could be anything pre-verbal, even like that of an adoption could be traumatizing. So trauma overwhelms the brain's processing, leaving pieces of unprocessed experiences frozen in time and space. We look at the trauma capsules to identify those earlier messages that are no longer serving us. With Tina, a question I would pose often was, where do your expectations of yourself and others come from? Are they too high? Or are they too low? She would use this story of, I'm not worthy of this attention if I can't please him, as a protection, which is fine. That's what got her through those early childhood years. But that narrative is no longer serving her at this moment. Number 2, Brainspotting helps with increased attunement. If you didn't get attunement early on in childhood, you're going to get it in Brainspotting. Brainspotting uses dual attunement, and it works not only with the client as a person, but also with the brain of the client, which is where the dual attunement frame comes in. So Brainspotting therapists work closely to follow the different levels of client communication, while at the same time following any eye and body cues. So with Tina, she worked to regulate her brain and body, but because of her attachment issues, she needed more from me. She needed me to be more interactive in her Brainspotting resource state sessions so that she could feel safe. So essentially that just meant more check-ins from me were needed, whereas usually I stay pretty quiet during a Brainspotting session. As her brain body healed, we switched from a resource model to a more activation model, which meant that things were progressing in the right direction. So without feeling that empathy from me, and it took some time to buy in and to trust me, that, she felt that presence of another person joining her on that journey. And so that was good. I think that traditional talk therapy wouldn't have achieved the same deep relationship and processing goals that we had. So I was happy with that. So increased attunement is number 2. Number 3 is understanding attachment and old wounds. And so Brainspotting helps us learn how our old stuff defines us and how to unlearn these thoughts and behaviors. When you look at a spot anywhere in the room, you look at a spot, you bring up the event, you look at a spot, and you observe where your mind goes. In other words, when you look left or right, up or down, you experience things differently. To the left and down, to some, may feel very scary. Maybe like a drop in your stomach scary. Whereas the right side can feel really calming. And if you want to try this out, go ahead and head to atheistinrecovery.com and type in episode 94. And there is an exercise there for self-spotting. I think that episode is how to treat anxiety head on. So back to number 3, when you focus on something, you have strong feelings about it. This looking left, right, up, down difference is more pronounced. Brainspotting will help you to find out more about your complex brain. And at first, you don't like it. Maybe you just don't like how it feels. I think this is really common for people that are used to being in control. I get that a lot. Like, I don't like how this feels, or I don't know if I'm doing this right. You just have to follow that train of thought. Follow it. Be curious about it. Your brain and body are trying to teach you something. So getting back to attachment styles, Tina identifies mostly as avoidant attachment. And it's important to know what your attachment style is. I think it's very important. And you could use this within your relationships too in order to connect better with your loved ones. With Tina, we processed down to a cellular level her attachment wounds, processed them down to resolution. So as a child, Tina was really only being seen when she was learning a skill. And that was the only time. And so when she would look in her highly accomplished father's eyes, a lot of times there was anger. And that taught her that maybe I can't look others in the eyes directly. Or maybe there's a fear there, a hesitation there to look others in the eyes directly because of those old wounds, that she was going to be judged harshly. No matter what your attachment style, however, the good news is if you can compassionately recognize your own attachment styles and not take it personally, that's healing. If you can recognize others' attachment styles and not take it personally, that's a bonus. You won the bonus round there. So, authentic attachment is an inherent quality of human beings. We all want to get there. And you can too. You can move in that direction with help. And that's really where the healing begins. So if you're interested in learning more about brain spotting, attachment styles, and addiction, I provide brain spotting to individuals in Virginia at my office and via Zoom online, anywhere in Virginia. Just go to atheistinrecovery.com, click on the yellow schedule button at the top right of the homepage, and you can schedule your free 15-minute appointment with me. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Atheists in Recovery podcast. For more great info and to stay up to date, head over to atheistinrecovery.com.